He had given up. After doctors, treatments, therapists, after years of waiting for something to change, nothing ever did. His twin boys were blind. That's what the world told him. That's what he believed. The house was always quiet. Until that afternoon, when he heard something that didn't belong there. Laughter. At first, he thought it was the wind, or maybe the TV left on in another room. But the sound came again, soft, sweet, strange. He stood up, heart pounding, unsure why he suddenly felt nervous. He walked down the hallway, slowly, listening, searching. And then he saw it, the light under the door. The playroom, the one no one used, the one that had been silent for years. The door was open, just a crack, and through it, he thought he saw her, the maid, kneeling by the tub, with his boys, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Joy Thompson didn't ask for much. She came to the Walker estate looking for steady work. She wasn't expecting warmth. She wasn't looking for connection. The house was large, cold, too clean like it had been frozen in time, curtains always drawn, lights dimmed low, rooms that echoed when no one spoke. Charles Walker barely looked at her the day she arrived. His voice was polite, distant. His eyes? Tired in a way that didn't come from work, but from loss. His sons, Gabriel and Michael, were just over 2. Beautiful, silent, unmoving. The file said they were blind from birth. No treatment had worked. No progress had ever come. Joy was told not to expect anything. Not reactions, not play, not light. But something about those boys stirred something in her. She couldn't name it, but she felt it. And one morning, while washing their faces, she saw something no one else had ever seen. Sometimes, what breaks you becomes the doorway to what heals you. This isn't just a story about sight. It's a story about grief, about silence, and about how love, real love, sees what others overlook. If you've ever felt like hope passed your house by, or if you've ever been the one who noticed something no one else did, then this story is for you. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and who in your life truly saw you when no one else did? Because sometimes, the miracle doesn't come through a doctor or a cure. Sometimes, it walks into the room quietly, wipes a child's face, and pays attention. The first morning, the house felt colder than the air outside. Joy Thompson stood at the edge of the long hallway, holding her breath without meaning to. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that feels like it's been there too long. Like grief had unpacked its bags and made itself at home. The floors didn't creak. The walls didn't speak. Even the light, what little there was, felt like it didn't have permission to move. She hadn't seen Mr. Walker since he greeted her briefly the night before. No handshake, just a nod, a few clipped instructions, and then he was gone. He hadn't stepped into the nursery, hadn't looked at the boys. She understood, in her own way. Some pain makes you disappear, even when you're still standing in the room. The boys were already awake when she entered, sitting in matching cribs, dressed in soft grey clothes, their eyes fixed on nothing. Gabriel and Michael, 2 years and 4 months old, pale skin, dark lashes, small hands resting quietly in their laps. They didn't cry, didn't reach, didn't react. She whispered their names anyway. No answer. The only sound in the room was the quiet rustle of the curtains behind her, heavy, lined, always drawn. She began the day's routine, just as the schedule listed. Breakfast, sponge bath, change of clothes, tidy the space. She moved slowly, giving them time to adjust to her presence. Not that they seemed to notice. Later, with the water warm in the tub and soft towels laid out, she lifted Michael first. His body was light, too light. She held him carefully, one hand supporting his back, the other gently cupping his head. He didn't resist, didn't flinch. He just sat there in the shallow water, quiet as ever. Joy rolled her sleeves up, dipped the washcloth in the water, and began to clean his face. And then it happened. A bead of soap slid toward his eye, and for the briefest moment, maybe a second, maybe less, His eyelid fluttered. She paused. It could have been reflex, a twitch, nothing. But something in her gut told her not to move. She stayed there, one hand in the water, her breath caught somewhere between fear and wonder. Then, slowly, she looked over at Gabriel. He was staring off, as always, but just behind him, the bathroom mirror caught a sliver of light. The sun had moved, just slightly, and now a soft line of brightness spilled across the tile. She adjusted the faucet without thinking, angling the chrome just enough for the reflection to shift. The light skimmed across the floor, across the edge of the tub, and stopped near Gabriel's toes. He turned his head. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, but it was deliberate. Just a few inches enough to follow the light. Joy blinked, heart thudding, her hands stilled in the water. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. She just watched. And then Michael did it again, that flutter. A soft blink, a blink that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with light. Her chest tightened. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing. She finished the bath quietly, her movements gentle, steady, as though afraid to disturb something sacred. When she lifted the boys out and wrapped them in towels, she kissed their heads without thinking. They didn't respond. But she felt something shift in the room. Later, after they were dressed and settled, Joy walked into the hallway and looked out the nearest window. The sky was pale blue. The garden outside was still. And inside this house, something had just woken up. She didn't tell anyone what she saw. Not yet. She didn't trust herself to name it. But that night, when she was alone in the small room they'd given her, she opened a notebook she hadn't used in months. She wrote just 4 words. Michael blinked at light. Then she set the pen down, closed the book, and whispered a prayer into the quiet. God, if I'm wrong, stop me. But if I'm right, help me see what you see. There was a quiet rhythm to the days in the Walker house. It wasn't peace, not really. It was more like the stillness that follows loss. A house that learned to survive by not expecting anything new. Joy never asked questions. She moved through the rooms with soft steps and steady hands, learning the routines, reading between the silences. The twins stayed quiet too. No tantrums, no giggles. Just 2 small boys sitting in a sunless nursery, surrounded by toys that never moved. But once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. That blink, the shift of the eyes, the turn of the head, it stayed with her. Not loud, not obvious, but constant. She found herself watching them more closely now. Not out of suspicion, but out of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more happening beneath the stillness. One morning, as she changed their clothes, she swapped the boys' positions by the window. It was subtle. Gabriel, now closer to the light, squinted slightly as the curtains stirred. Michael reached out, not blindly, but towards something. She didn't write it down this time. She just watched and wondered. By the 3rd week, small details began to surface. She'd hum sometimes while folding laundry. Nothing special, just little things her grandmother used to sing in the kitchen. Old church melodies, pieces of memory. One afternoon, she was softly humming, "What a friend we have in Jesus," while tucking in the bedsheets, and she caught it. Gabriel turned his head toward her voice. Not the sound of the sheet, not the movement. Her voice. She paused, waited, then sang a little louder, just one line. Michael shifted. His fingers tapped the mattress beside him, almost like he was listening. No one else noticed. The housekeeper came and went. The gardener trimmed the hedge outside the nursery window. Charles Walker remained out of sight, his door always closed. But the boys were listening and responding. Bit by bit, Joy began to rearrange things. A lamp in the corner, a softer bulb. Curtains opened just a little, just enough for light to stretch across the floor in the late afternoon. She said nothing, but she watched, and the boys began to follow. Not every time, not always clearly, but enough. Enough to make her heart ache with questions. One evening, after the boys had been put to bed, Joy passed through the hallway and stopped by the linen closet. Something had been bothering her. The eye drops, They were part of the boy's care routine, prescribed, logged, administered at the same time every day. She'd been told they were for comfort, something to help with inflammation, keep the eyes from straining. But the more she watched, the more she noticed how still the boys became after the drops, almost like they withdrew. Even more than usual. She reached for the cabinet key the housekeeper always left hanging near the pantry. Hands steady, breath quiet, she opened the locked drawer where their supplies were kept. Rows of small bottles, labels she didn't recognize. She scanned the ingredients, the instructions, and there it was, in tiny print right beneath the dosage. May reduce photosensitivity temporarily, not for long-term pediatric use. She stared at the words, read them again, then closed the cabinet carefully, her thoughts racing. Why would a blind child, need something that reduced their sensitivity to light? That night, she didn't sleep. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling of the small guest room, her grandmother's voice echoing somewhere in her mind. You don't need a degree to pay attention. You just need to care enough to look twice. Joy didn't know what to do yet. But she knew this. Something wasn't right. And the boys, they were trying to speak in the only way they could, with blinks, with shifts, with silence that wasn't empty but full of something waiting to be seen. There were windows in every room, but none of them opened. They were framed in expensive wood, trimmed in thick velvet drapes, and always shut. Even on the sunniest days, the house stayed dim, cool, controlled. Joy noticed it more now. The way the morning light would try to peek through the edges of the curtains in the hallway and get swallowed by shadow. The way every lamp glowed just enough to see but never enough to feel warm. At first, she thought it was habit, then preference. But now, she wondered, what kind of home needs to keep light out? She started small. One afternoon, when the housekeeper was busy sorting invoices in the office, Joy slipped into the nursery and quietly pulled the curtain back 2 inches. The window was high, old, and a bit stiff, but the light poured in like it had been waiting years for permission. It stretched across the rug, a long golden stripe that touched the edge of the toy chest and spilled beneath Michael's crib. She said nothing. She just stepped back and watched. Michael blinked first, slowly. Then he turned his head, not sharply, but intentionally, as if something had brushed his awareness and he was reaching for it in the only way he knew how. Gabriel, who had been lying flat on his back, stirred. His eyes followed the light across the ceiling. Joy held her breath. Her heart thudded quietly in her chest. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't coincidence. This was response. And for the first time since she'd stepped into that house, she felt the weight of something heavy shift inside the room. Like a held breath, beginning to exhale. That night, she skipped the eye drops. Just for one boy. Just once. She waited until the house was quiet, the hallway still, the staff tucked into their corners. Then she stood at the nursery door, dropper in hand, and chose Gabriel. She gave Michael his dose as usual. But Gabriel, she simply held, whispering softly as she pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, pretending to follow the routine. Then she tucked him in. The next morning, the difference was subtle, but there. Michael was still, passive, his eyes dull. But Gabriel? He reached. Toward the mirror Joy had set near the window. It caught a shard of light from the hallway, and he reached. Joy bit her lip, hard. She couldn't say anything yet. Not to the staff. Not to Charles. But something had shifted. Later that week, she stood in the nursery, watching dust float through the beam of sunlight she'd allowed in. She glanced around, then walked to the cabinet again. This time, she opened the drawer slowly. Her hands didn't shake. Inside, the same rows of bottles. Different brands, different labels. But the same warning etched at the bottom of each one. May reduce photosensitivity. Not recommended for long-term pediatric use without supervision. And then tucked in the back she found a folder. Old prescriptions, shipping invoices, signatures, initials. The name printed at the bottom of every form? Dr. Ernest Vale. She didn't know the name, but something in her chest tightened when she saw it. All of it. had been approved. Signed, ordered, repeated. For months. That evening, the quiet in the house felt different. Not peaceful, not routine. Heavy. She walked past Mr. Walker's study. His door was cracked slightly, not open, but not closed either. Inside, she could see him sitting by the fireplace. Same posture, same stillness. A man who had learned to make peace with silence, because it required nothing from him. Joy paused. She thought about saying something. About the light, the blink, the drops. But then she remembered the first day, how he hadn't even looked into the nursery. How the grief in his eyes wasn't sharp anymore, just settled. Like a man who had made an agreement with heartbreak and stopped asking for more. So she kept walking, not because she was afraid, but because the truth wasn't ready yet. Not for him. Not for them. Not until it spoke louder than the silence. That night, she opened her notebook again. She wrote slowly, carefully, 1 entry at a time. Opened curtain 2 inches. Light reached crib. Gabriel tracked mirror. No eye drops. Increased response. Found name, Dr. Ernest Vale. Then, at the bottom, in quiet handwriting, they are responding to light. I don't think they're blind. I think someone made them this way. The mirror was small. Just a piece from Joy's old compact, the kind she used to keep in her purse back when life was simpler. She'd cleaned it, dried it, and set it gently on the nursery shelf near the window where the late afternoon light passed through like a blessing. She didn't tell anyone. Some truths don't come in speeches. They arrive in quiet gestures, like a hand placing a mirror on the floor to see what happens next. It was nearly 5 p.m. The house was still. Dinner was being prepped in the kitchen, the soft clatter of utensils echoing faintly through the vents. The housekeeper had left early that day, and no one else ever came into the nursery this time of day. Just Joy. And the boys. She sat between their cribs, knees folded, the mirror angled just so. A sliver of light caught it, bouncing across the wall, then the floor, then the tiny giraffe toy between them. Gabriel's eyes caught the shimmer first. He blinked once, then again, then turned his face toward it, with a slow, searching motion. Michael followed, his fingers twitching near the rails of his crib. The light danced gently across the bars. His head moved with it. Joy felt her throat tighten, but she stayed still, no sound, no sudden breath. Her hand, steady. Her heart, loud. This was no accident. They were watching. They were seeing. They were reaching for the thing the world said didn't exist. And then, a creak in the hallway. Soft, careful. She didn't look. She didn't need to. Some footsteps carry a weight only grief can make. Even when silent, they say everything. She knew it was him. Charles Walker stood at the threshold of the nursery. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't interrupt. The door was open just wide enough for him to see everything. Joy, sitting on the floor, the mirror in her hand. His sons, eyes lit with something he hadn't seen since the day they were born. Light, movement, life. She turned her head slightly, caught him in her periphery, but didn't panic. She just whispered, "We're playing." Her voice was soft. Too soft for defense, too strong for denial. Charles stepped in, slow, almost like he didn't trust the floor beneath him. His eyes flicked from Joy to the boys, to the shimmer on the wall, to the expression on Gabriel's face. He didn't sit down. He didn't ask questions. He just stared. And in that long, aching moment, something happened in his face, not dramatic, not loud. A breaking. A soft kind. The kind men try to swallow when no one's watching. "What is this?" he asked, finally. His voice wasn't angry, just cracked, worn down to the bone. Joy looked up. Her hands didn't move. "They see the light," she said quietly. "They're following it." He blinked. Once. Twice. Then shook his head, almost like trying to wake himself from a dream. "That's not." He stopped. Started again. "That's not possible." But his eyes didn't leave the boys. Michael reached again, his hand brushing the edge of light on the floor. Gabriel tilted his head, tracking the flicker on the ceiling. "They've never," he whispered. "Not once, not in 2 years." Joy nodded gently. "I know, that's what I thought too." The room went quiet again. Not the empty kind, the heavy kind. The kind of silence that follows truth when it finally walks in. Charles looked at Joy, then really looked. Not as a maid, not as someone passing through, but as a witness, a person who had stayed long enough to notice what no one else did, a person who wasn't afraid to look again. He didn't speak after that. He just turned, slowly, and walked out. The door stayed open behind him, and for the first time since Joy arrived, the light from the hallway was allowed to stay. That night, she didn't write in her notebook. She sat on the edge of her bed, the mirror resting in her hands, and just stared at it. There were still no answers, no guarantees, no proof anyone would believe. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. Charles didn't speak of it the next morning. Not to Joy, not to the boys, not to anyone. He didn't even glance at the mirror on the nursery shelf. Didn't ask where it came from. Didn't ask why his sons had followed the light. But something had changed in him. Joy could see it. He lingered in the hallway longer than usual, paused outside the nursery door before heading into his office. Watched, quietly, when she bathed the boys as if afraid to see too much or not enough. He didn't want to believe, but he didn't want to look away either. That afternoon, Joy did something bold. She walked into the study holding a notebook. Not a report, not a complaint. Just pages filled with days of observations, scribbled in careful handwriting, like pieces of a puzzle only she had tried to fit together. Charles looked up from his desk. His expression wasn't cold, just guarded, like a man who spent years building walls for good reason and isn't sure yet whether to tear one down. Joy stood still in front of him, not demanding, not pushing, just offering. "I'd like to show you something," she said softly. "You don't have to agree, just look." She opened the notebook. Page by page, she showed him. The time she opened the curtain and Michael blinked. The day Gabriel tracked the sunlight across the ceiling. The evening she skipped the drops and saw more movement than ever before. The label warnings, the dosage logs, the name Dr. Ernest Vale. Charles didn't interrupt. He sat there in silence, the kind that listens. One hand at his mouth, the other resting flat on the table, fingers curled slightly, like holding something invisible. He turned a page, read, then another. At one point, his eyes paused on a note Joy had barely remembered writing. "Light doesn't lie, it just waits for someone to see it." He closed the notebook slowly, then looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something unguarded in his face. "I never wanted to believe it," he said. His voice was low, quiet but not lost. "When they told me, after Caroline died, I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to. I couldn't. I was afraid to hope." Joy didn't answer. She didn't have to. She knew what it cost to hope when it had let you down before. Charles looked toward the hallway, toward the nursery he had barely entered in months. "They told me not to expect progress, that blind children don't always respond, that silence was normal, that this was our life now." He looked back at her, and I believed them, because it was easier than believing something might still be possible. There was a pause. The room felt smaller now, not cramped, but close, as if everything inside it had leaned in. "Do you think it's the drops?" he asked. Joy nodded. "I think it's part of it, and I think someone knew. I don't know why yet, but the patterns don't lie." Charles stood, slowly. He looked like a man holding something fragile, something he hadn't touched in years. "Let's stop them, just for a couple days." Joy met his gaze. "Are you sure?" "No," he said, "but I can't ignore it anymore." For the next 48 hours, they stopped the drops. Together, Joy tracked everything, every blink, every turn of the head, every flicker of recognition. Charles began joining her quietly in the nursery. Not with questions, not with control, just presence. He sat on the floor once, knees stiff, unsure how to move, how to play. But the boys didn't seem to mind. When Michael reached toward the soft beam of light falling across the rug, Charles whispered, "He sees it." Joy smiled gently. "Yes," she said, "he does." Gabriel squinted at the mirror, then laughed not loudly, but enough to echo. Charles put a hand to his chest, as if something inside had startled awake. That evening, he asked Joy something simple. "Do you believe this was always there, and we just missed it?" She looked at the boys, now curled in their blankets, breathing slow. "I think it was waiting," she said, "for someone to look again." It was Joy's idea. She found the letter decals in a drawer of old toys stuck beneath a broken puzzle box, half yellowed with time. They were meant for windows. Colorful letters, soft adhesive, a child's name, spelled out in light. She held them in her hands for a long time before doing anything. Then one morning, just after breakfast, she walked into the nursery and opened the curtains all the way. For the first time, sunlight flooded the room. Not just a crack or a corner, but full. It hit the cribs, the floor, the books, the mirror on the shelf, and something else too. The dust. Years of it, floating upward like spirits unbottled. Joy stood by the window and pressed the letters softly, one by one, onto the glass. G. A. B. R. I. E. L. Then the next. M. I. C. H. A. E. L. The boys didn't speak, but they watched the light move across their names, watched her hands trace the shapes, watched like they knew on some wordless level that something sacred was happening. And for a moment, it felt like the house was holding its breath. Charles didn't come until later. The nursery was quieter now, sunlight soft and golden, warming the carpet like grace itself had entered through the window. Joy was sitting with the boys, Gabriel curled beside her, Michael on her lap. They were playing with nothing, just the light on the floor, the mirror catching it, bouncing it gently across the rug. Charles stepped in. But this time, he didn't stop at the doorway. He knelt down beside them, slower than usual, his joints stiff, his hands unsure. But he came closer than he ever had. Joy glanced up, offering a small smile. He didn't return it. His eyes were locked on the glass, on the names. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. Caroline picked those names. His voice was low, not choked, not shaky, just buried, like someone digging something up they weren't sure they wanted to find. Joy said nothing. She loved angels, he continued, not in a cheesy way, just, she said she wanted names that meant something. He stared at the letters on the window, the way the sunlight cut through them. She died before she ever got to say them out loud. There it was. Not just pain, not just memory, but the breaking. Not with sound, but with stillness. He leaned back against the wall, one hand over his mouth, eyes shining but not falling. Joy didn't speak. She just let it hang. Sometimes silence is the only kind of respect. A few minutes passed. Then Gabriel did something he hadn't done before. He reached up toward the window. His fingers brushed the glass, landed on the G. He held it there. Charles watched, breath tight, lips parted, like a man not ready to breathe again just yet. Then Michael, not to be left behind, scooted forward, a quiet grunt in his throat, and touched the M. They didn't know what the letters meant, but their fingers traced them, like memory. Charles blinked, then whispered, "They've never done that before." Joy finally spoke gently. "They're learning their names." He nodded once, but it broke something anyway. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and for the first time since she met him, Charles looked small. Not weak, not pitiful, just human. Just a man whose life had been too quiet for too long. Later, Joy found him sitting in the sunroom, a room no one used. The curtains had always stayed closed in there. The plants had died long ago. But now, the windows were open, and he was sitting in the light. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then stepped in, carefully. "I'm sorry," he said without looking at her. Joy paused. For what? For letting go too early, for choosing silence over searching. He turned toward her. "You didn't just see my sons, you saw what I couldn't." She didn't respond with words. She just sat down beside him, knees almost touching. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was healing. And outside, the wind lifted the curtain, just enough to let the sun fall softly on the floor. Charles didn't return to his office the next morning. He sat in the sunroom, just like the night before. The curtains open now, the light stretching across the cold tile like it had been waiting for years. A mug of coffee rested on the table beside him, still full, untouched. He wasn't reading, wasn't making calls, just sitting, still, watching dust float in the sunlight like tiny reminders of time he couldn't get back. Joy passed by once, then again, and finally stepped inside. He didn't look at her, but she could tell he knew she was there. His voice was quiet when it came. "You said someone knew." She paused. "Yes." "About the drops?" "Yes." He nodded, slowly, as if confirming a suspicion that had already formed. "I let them into this house. I paid them. I handed over my sons." Joy sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "You were grieving." "I was hiding." Silence settled between them again, not hostile, just hard. He turned toward her, not angry, just exhausted. "Do you know what it's like to believe the worst because it's easier than hoping?" Joy met his gaze. "I think hope scares people more than pain does." He let out a short breath. Not a laugh, not a cry, just the sound of someone standing on the edge of regret. That afternoon, Charles called his lawyer, asked for the medical release forms, reviewed every note signed, every approval, every prescription. Then he called someone else, a name Joy hadn't heard before, Dr. Ernest Vale. The man on the other end of the call answered with practiced ease, calm, clinical. "Mr. Walker, everything all right?" Charles didn't speak right away. "I want a full breakdown of the boy's prescriptions, every drug, every change, every reason." "Of course, but may I ask what prompted?" "Just send it, by tonight." His tone wasn't cold, it was awake now. And Ernest Vale, whoever he really was, knew it. Later, Joy found Charles in the nursery. He was standing by the cribs, watching his sons sleep. No clipboard, no phone, just watching. Michael had one hand resting against the letter M on the window. Gabriel was curled beneath the sunlight, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm. "They don't need perfect," Joy said softly behind him. "They just need present." He nodded, slowly. "I don't know how to fix this." "Start with not turning away." He stayed there for a long time. The next morning, Joy made a decision. She contacted someone she hadn't spoken to in years. A friend of her grandmother's, a retired nurse who'd once worked in pharmaceutical compliance. She told her just enough to raise concern, and the woman gave her a name. A young lab technician who had recently resigned from a private clinic involved in experimental pediatric trials. "I'll reach out," Joy said. Quietly, the investigation began in silence. Charles hired a private investigator, discreet, professional. Joy started keeping more detailed notes. Photos, patterns, times, dosage, changes, reactions. The twins continued to grow brighter, not suddenly, not miraculously, but steadily. They reached more, turned more, responded more. And every time they did, the weight in Charles's chest pressed harder. Because every blink was a question. How long has this been possible? What did I miss? What did I allow? One night, just after the twins had gone to sleep, Joy found Charles at the kitchen table. He had the folder open in front of him, the one from Dr. Vale. Pages of prescriptions, notes, authorizations. All signed, all legal, all clean. Too clean. "Nothing here explains anything," he said, flipping through. "They covered it well. That's how shadows work. Joy said. They don't need chaos, just quiet. He looked up. I want to go public. Not yet, but soon. Joy nodded. We will, when the story's ready, when the truth is loud enough. And then, for the first time, he said their names. Out loud, clearly. Gabriel, Michael. The sound of them caught in his throat, not broken, just heavy with meaning. Joy smiled. They know you're saying it. Do you think they forgive me? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the window where their names still clung to the glass. Letters bent slightly from the sun, but still holding. I think they're waiting. For what? For you to see them, not like the world sees them, not like doctors did, but as your boys. Charles didn't speak, but this time he stayed in the room. The story didn't break with shouting. It started with a photo. Gabriel's hand resting on the letter G. Michael turning toward a beam of light, eyes open, focused, alive. Joy had taken it weeks earlier, not to prove anything, just to remember. But now it became a seed, the kind you plant quietly and pray it grows. Charles gave it to a reporter he trusted, a woman who once wrote about his late wife's foundation, someone who remembered Caroline not as a name in a headline, but as a human being. He didn't give her everything, not yet. Just enough. Enough to start the questions. The article came out on a Wednesday. Born blind or made blind. A billionaire's twins and the nurse who noticed. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't cruel. It was curious, the kind of truth that doesn't scream, but lingers. Within 24 hours, the phone started ringing. Lawyers, doctors, journalists, parents. The next day, another article. Then a radio segment. Then a televised interview request, not for Charles, for Joy. She declined. Not yet, she told him. Let the story speak first. The court date came faster than anyone expected. The lab denied everything. The doctor, Dr. Ernest Vale, claimed full legal authority. Every signature, every document, every dose had been approved. Joy testified first. She didn't cry. She didn't waver. She just told the truth, moment by moment, memory by memory. She spoke of blinking, light, laughter, the way silence can lie when no one questions it. She spoke of her grandmother's voice. You don't need a degree to pay attention. The courtroom didn't move when she finished. But it didn't need to. Truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to land. Charles took the stand next. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Just stood there, one hand on the edge of the podium, the other resting near his chest, like holding something invisible. I believed what they told me, he began. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't pay attention. And because of that, my sons were put through something I'll never fully understand. He looked down for a moment, then back up. But someone did pay attention. Not for money, not for recognition. Just because she cared. She saw what none of us saw. And because of her, I got to see my sons for the first time. He didn't speak long, but no one in that room looked away. When the whistleblower came forward, the young technician Joy had reached through her contact, the case cracked wide open. She brought evidence. Emails, formulas, trials not listed in public records, payments, protocols, internal messages about light suppression datasets. The truth didn't scream. It stacked page by page, fact by fact. And when the judge ruled, when the verdict came down, the room didn't erupt. It exhaled. Malpractice confirmed. Experimental drug trials without proper consent. Severe ethical breaches. The clinic was shut down. Dr. Vale lost his license. And the boys, Gabriel and Michael, became something more than a headline. They became seen. Back at the estate, the windows stayed open now. Light lived there again. Not loud, not blinding, but soft, honest, free. One morning, Joy brought in a set of clear window crayons, the kind you can use to write messages on glass. She handed one to Gabriel. You want to try? He looked at her eyes, focused, aware, and took it in his small hand. She steadied his grip, helped him make the first letter. J, Michael joined, scribbled beside it. Joy couldn't tell what he meant to write, but she didn't correct him. It was perfect. Charles stood in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He just watched, and when Gabriel turned to him, eyes full of light, and smiled, Charles smiled back. "They see you," Joy said gently. He nodded. "And now I see them." The house was no longer quiet. Not like before. The kind of silence that once settled into the walls, heavy and constant, had been replaced with something new. Stillness that breathed. Laughter that echoed down the hall without apology. Voices not many, not loud but alive. The curtains stayed open now. Not just in the nursery. Everywhere. Windows that once held years of dust now framed sunlight. Light that moved across the floor like forgiveness. Light that had always wanted in, just waited for someone to let it. Joy was packing. Not quickly, not sadly, but with care. Her contract was up. No one had asked her to stay, and she hadn't expected to. Charles had thanked her more times than she could count, in quiet gestures, in changed routines, in the way he no longer walked past the nursery like it wasn't there. But still, this was never meant to be hers. She folded the last of her clothes into a small duffel and turned to look at the room that had held her for months. Simple, quiet, but full now. Full of memory, full of proof. Downstairs, Charles was waiting. He stood in the entryway, dressed simply, no suit, no tie, just a father, trying to find words for something that mattered. When she came down the stairs, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at her the way someone does when they finally see not just what you did, but who you are. Then he handed her something. A leather-bound book. Simple, unmarked. Inside, the first page already written. His handwriting small, steady. Walker Thompson Family Logbook. Entry 1. Gabriel smiled at his reflection. Michael touched the light. Joy laughed. Charles breathed. Joy blinked, slow. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the book. "It's yours," he said quietly. "Ours, if you'll stay." She didn't answer with words. She just nodded once, and smiled. That evening, they sat together in the new sunroom, where the ivy had started to grow again along the windows. The boys were on the floor, chasing the glint of a silver wind chime that hung from the open window. Gabriel's fingers brushed it. Michael laughed, full and clear. Charles turned to Joy. "What do you call this?" She looked at the boys, the light, the air moving through the room like breath. "Attention," she said. "And grace." In the weeks that followed, Charles made it official. Not just the foundation, though, they did that too. The Second Glance Foundation. Built to advocate for children misdiagnosed, for mothers and caregivers ignored, for stories silenced by systems that never paid attention. But the family part, that's what mattered most. One morning, Joy placed new decals on the nursery window. Gabriel, Michael, and beneath them, just one more, Joy. The boys traced the letters with their fingers. Michael looked up, pointed to hers, and said it clearly, "Joy." She turned, startled, eyes glassed with disbelief. Charles stood in the doorway. "They see you," he said. "And now I do too." Years from now, people would ask how it happened, how blindness could be misdiagnosed, how so many experts could miss what one maid noticed in a mirror, and no one would have a perfect answer, because it wasn't just science, it wasn't just medicine, and it wasn't just one blink. It was love that paid attention. It was truth that refused to be quiet. It was God moving, not in thunder, but in the watching eyes of a child who followed light. Joy would never call it a miracle. She would sit with Gabriel and Michael on the floor and say softly, "You weren't waiting to be healed. You were waiting to be seen." The house glows now, not from wealth, not from restoration, but from windows that stay open, from names written in glass, and laughter that no one dares to silence anymore, from light finally having a home to live in.